Welcome, everybody, to Soccer 101. My name is Taylor Rockwell, and this week, unlike the best footballers in the world, we're taking a break from the domestic campaigns, cup competitions, Champions League, international commitments, the Club World Cup, and the looming World Cup to discuss fixture congestion. It's an issue that's only becoming more common as the number of potential obligations for professional footballers only continues to mount. But how big of a problem is it? What are clubs doing to ease the load to the extent that they can? What is the impact on players? Are we reaching a breaking point? So many questions to be answered. To do so is a man who always has plenty of time for everything and is never congested. It's Graham Ruthven. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Taylor Rockwell. On that note, are there any load management programs for podcasters who have to watch about 30 to 40 matches
there should be
a week?
One
would be handy at this point, yeah.
Yeah, it's finding a way to be able to complain about having to watch soccer while recognizing that you are complaining about having to watch soccer. That's kind of the cycle that I find myself in.
I mean, the way I see it, it's sort of like, is his name Bruce, the kid in Matilda, who loves chocolate cake and gets brought up to the stage by Miss Trunchbull, and then gets made to eat the chocolate cake or Homer when he gets made to eat the donuts in hell.
Yeah, except that Homer just rolls with it the whole time.
Well, that's me.
Yeah, see? There you go, exactly. You handle it well, yeah. And you would look as good in a muumuu as Homer does, so there you go.
Graham, life.
Graham, we are here to discuss fixture congestion and not my clumsy attempt at remembering what Homer Simpson was wearing in that episode. Let's talk about what it actually is, with the introduction aside. If you're explaining fixture congestion to somebody, how are you explaining it?
Yeah, so this is something that inevitably happens over the course of the season for the elite level clubs where they are involved in a number of competitions. So if you're talking about Manchester City or this season Liverpool, who went quite far in a lot of the competitions. You've got your 38 Premier League games as part of the regular season. You've then got your Carabao Cup games. So if you go far in that competition, you've got 2 legs in the semi-finals, then a final, of course. You've got FA Cup games, which may include replays until relatively recently they included replays. And then you've got your European commitments as well, which, by the way, they've just expanded the Champions League and the Europa League so that you have 8 league phase fixtures now. There's an extra round of games, so Man City played Real Madrid in the round of 32. I think if they had gone on to win the Champions League, they would have had to play 17 games? 15 or 17 games to win the Champions League. So that is like not far off half a Premier League season in the Champions League. And you may have to qualify for the Champions League as well. Not if you are one of the Premier League teams, but if you are a Celtic or a Rangers or one of the clubs from one of the smaller leagues or outside the top 5 big leagues as well, your season may start in early July or mid-July, certainly, in preparation for the Champions League. So yeah, fixture congestion is a big talking point in soccer at the moment. It actually feels like a defining issue of this era of soccer where you have FIFPro suing FIFA because of the number of fixtures being added to the calendar with an expanded World Cup and an expanded Club World Cup this summer as well, which is another thing to add to the docket. You have players like Raphael Varane retiring from international duty because he says his body can't take playing non-stop soccer season after season. Jurgen Klopp as well was always very vocal about the demands being made on his players. So it's increasingly a big talking point in the sport. Exactly.
And when we talk about the problems that result, the Varane one kind of hits on 2 simultaneously. There is the physical impact on players. You've got the risk of injury. You've got greater fatigue, decreased performance. You also then have the prioritization of certain competitions or certain teams, basically, that if you have so many games, you can't handle the international window because now you're on the road, you're traveling, then you're playing in different areas, and now you're back on the road again. It just becomes that much of a drain, so you have to choose, do I really want to play for my national team or should I retire? But you have clubs kind of doing the same, where they're wondering, should we actually play in this competition? Should we prioritize this one, or should we maybe just let the reserves play in that one? And so then you have the watering down of certain kind of historically important competitions along the way. Graham, any other major issues before we get into some of the impact on players?
Well, I think, and this is maybe skipping ahead, but the way that modern soccer has changed as well is a big factor where there's more intensity, more energy. Obviously, coaches like Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola have set the zeitgeist for the last generation, for the last 10 to 15 years. Their approach it takes more out of players, right? And so that is a factor as well. Not only are you asking players to play more matches, but within those matches, they're having to do more work as well, and there's more to manage.
Exactly. And you've got, like, within those number of matches, if you've got a smaller squad or if you've got less money, you can't, like, build out that team. So now that smaller number of players are dealing with more matches with more minutes from those matches because they can't, like, kind of spread them out as much. And so you're getting incredibly fatigued players, incredibly injured players, and you're getting a decline in the overall quality of the matches you're actually watching.
Yeah, there was a study that I found by FIFPro that says that players are now covering 22% more ground in an average match than 10 years ago because, as I say, the zeitgeist has changed. There was a really interesting and useful piece by Jordan Campbell for The Athletic, which was on this very subject about fixture congestion and how clubs kind of deal with it. And this is a quote from that article. Research by Chris Barnes, a UEFA sports scientist who is also a performance consultant to Danish top-flight club Brøndby, found that the high-intensity running distance and actions between its 2006-07 seasons and 2012-13 seasons increased by 30% and 50% respectively. Sprint distance and the number of sprints has also increased by 35% and 85%. So we're talking about, like, it's a different sport, and we mention this on the main feed every so often. Like, if you ever catch a clip of, certainly if you go back to the 80s or the 90s, but equally if you go back to the early 2000s and watch a game, like, watch the tempo of the game, watch the speed of the game, watch what players are actually doing rather than just the goals, it's almost a different sport. And that it feels like it's led us to this breaking point we're now experiencing with player workload.
Dude, totally. And in that era, there are, like, certain clips. Like, there was one I watched on Instagram recently of, like, Ryan Giggs, like, launching a 90-yard counterattack on his own. And sure, like, he is flying down the pitch and defenders are trying to stay with him. But the rest of the team is sort of, like, casually jogging behind. Like, well, we'll get there. We'll get there. Like, I feel like in the modern game, it is everybody is sprinting back with him and everybody's back in their position and then everyone's transitioning back. And it's just so much running at such a high intensity, it leads to genuinely a concept I was not familiar with until Graham put it into the running order for today's episode, redlining, which I am now, like, have read too much about, Graham, but can you explain the basics of that one for us, please?
Yeah, so as I understand it, this is a term that comes from, how to describe it, like technology companies. Yeah. There are a lot of companies and clubs who are now using AI and machine learning to predict when a player could suffer an injury. So the way that this works is they feed a whole lot of data into the model, things like the load, accelerations during matches, how much distance they're covering, their velocity during a match or a training session, what foot they're putting more weight on as well, which I found fairly interesting that they can put that stuff into a model. One company that I found says that they will feed in up to 112 different data points from a single observation, so that could be a training session or a match. And they will also feed in historic data from that player, from other players as well with a similar profile. And from that, they will get some sort of idea of how close a player could be to an injury. So there's some sort of predictive model there. And so at any given time, top-level clubs, this obviously costs a lot of money, so it's not something that Stirling Albion do, but it's certainly something that Liverpool or Man City or whoever will do at the top of the Premier League. They will have a profile for each player, which provides an idea of which players have basically, in layman's terms, got a lot left in the tank, and which players are redlining, which is the term, which is players who are at serious risk of injury, players who might need to be rotated out of the team. I find that really interesting because in one article I found there's still a stigma about managers referencing this information for fear of fans being like, you're the manager, you should be making decisions. But it is something apparently that is really prevalent in managers making certain decisions now. So if we see a match where there's a surprising team selection where a player's not in the team, it might well be that they've got this information that player is redlining and they need to take care of that player. And there are certain things that they can do outside of resting a player as well from a match. They can do different sessions for a player on the training ground, different gym work as well. But yeah, there's a lot more that goes into this than 15 years ago when these companies and these terms didn't exist.
And from what I read, it protects both ways because we are talking about players like having to play all of these different games, but certainly there are plenty of players who want to play all those games and want to be out there every single time. And I think some of the kind of red line analysis and how it informs player selection is interesting when you get players saying, like, I wanted to play, I wanted to be out there today, when they're asked after the game about why they were rested or why they weren't part of it. And from what I understand, you have these moments where medical teams are saying, this guy's right there. We got to give him a day off. We got to give him a session off. We got to let him kind of recover, because otherwise you're risking breakdown. And then with the body being basically over its capacity, you risk further breakdown upon that, which then becomes that vicious cycle that can lead to career-threatening injuries, basically.
And we had a case of this very recently. The story with Alphonso Davies, his injury for Canada, is apparently, and look, there's two sides to this. Canada Soccer are briefing that it wasn't actually as Bayern Munich say, but Bayern Munich and Davies' agent say that basically it was passed on to Canada Soccer that through their information, their predictive model said that Alphonso Davies was essentially redlining and they needed to be careful with him. They ignore that. Canada Soccer, Jesse Marsch starts him in 2 games, and Alphonso Davies picks up an ACL tear in that game against the USA. Now, it tends not to be injuries like that come from redlining. It tends to be pure muscle injuries and muscle fatigue. So you could argue that was just bad luck, but Bayern Munich are angry that he was on the pitch in the first place.
And honestly, I think that explanation makes me go from, Bayern are just mad, to there is something here. Because when I first heard that, I thought, yeah, but it's an ACL. Like, you might have warning signs. You might have, like, I felt some pain. But professionals aren't going to play through that. They're going to stop and be like, something is wrong with my knee. So it didn't make sense to me why Bayern were making that complaint until you then look at all of the data they have and how much it can predict. There is, like, X percentage likelihood that he is going to be injured. It has increased. We need to keep that in mind when we play him. And it can just be it's not saying like it's definitely going to be a knee or something like that, but just the idea that this player is much more statistically likely to get injury can then be backed up in this moment. So I do get where Bayern are coming from, even if it seems a little bit like Minority Report in the levels of data analysis to understand like human behavior.
Yeah, there's no model that says Alphonso Davies is going to get an ACL injury in the first 50 minutes of the Nations League third place playoff game against the USA. And maybe there will be.
Very
in the
good
future.
model if there were that.
Yeah. There'd be no need for us to watch soccer. The robots would just take over, which they already are.
Yeah, give it a couple years. All right.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right, Taylor. The predictive model suggests that he's at risk, and that's why Bayern are upset about that whole situation.
And so I think that is then really interesting because we hear so much about fixture congestion, the problem it presents. And in some ways, what we're talking about when it comes to solutions are like, yeah, we have to deal with it. So these are solutions we have found. The obvious solution would be to have fewer games and to make competitions shorter or less impactful to player scheduling. But until Gianni Infantino decides that FIFA doesn't like money, what we're more likely to see is teams having to find ways to deal with this. And the improved approach to medicine and recovery, Graham, is something that I think you've hit upon already, and how new tools, both like actual tools like cryotherapy and compression therapy, can be combined with nutrition to basically allow better individualized training and better individualized health and performance.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing to understand is that from everything that I read, a lot of the measures are about trying to restrict muscle injuries and muscle fatigue. There's not really a way to prevent like a broken leg or even an ACL injury, although you can maybe prevent that player from being on the pitch. But most of the measures are about muscle injuries. So this is from Jordan's piece from The Athletic, very very interesting. I would recommend readers go and search that out. This is a quote: "You have a depletion of glycogen, is that how you pronounce that? Which serves as the primary energy source during physical activity, and you have a microscopic tears in the myosin fibers, which work to contract the muscles. It can be the muscle that breaks down, but it can also be the function of the muscle, as it puts more demands on the ligaments and the joints. If the capacity of the muscle to control the knee is exceeded, the knee then may go." So you have a knee. There's knee injuries are related to this as well because of obviously the way that the knee is constructed with muscles around it. And so you have a number of different ways that you can guard against that. You have sports therapists who will provide a soft tissue massage before and after games. They are designed to improve the blood flow to the muscles. Staying fueled before and after the games is also really important. So hydration and food being available within the dressing room. I don't know if anyone has ever seen. You often see it with teams that are maybe celebrating a win or something, and the social media team will be in the dressing room. I'm always amazed at how much food there is. There's often a table in the middle. There's so much water and like hydration drinks and mixtures, and then there's food. Often there will be Pizza tends to be something players will have after a game because they need to replace what they're, as funny as that may seem, they need to replace basically what they've lost during the game. So lots of food, lots of water. Another thing is gym work, where you're putting the muscles under load. But you don't want big, long sessions. You want short, infrequent sessions of 30 minutes the day before and after a game, apparently, is ideal. 3 or 4 sessions a week with 5 or 6 different exercises and increasing weight to create what is called super compensation. Not a term that I had heard of before, but again, it's in Jordan's article for The Athletic, which is very good. I read that some clubs have even built gyms at their stadiums so that players can have mini sessions on match day. It's all about those short, sharp bursts, not really having big, long, hour-long sessions. And you've also got movement exercises as well, which are usually done before a training session, and those are meant to improve the mechanics and your range of motion and joints. And sounds like something I could use with the back pain that I occasionally have, especially when I go to a Jack White gig. But as for range of motion and joints in the hip and the spine and the feet as well. One of the things that's a real challenge is coming up with a program. So each player will have a program, right? And as I said earlier, different players will have different profiles of load management, and some may be redlining, others will be fine. One of the things and I can completely understand why this would be the case, it's not something that I'd thought of, you still need to train as a team. So you might have a player who the sports science department is saying, they're redlining, they can only train for 30 minutes. But you have to prepare for a game with that team. So it won't be uncommon for players to be pulled out of training sessions after 30 minutes, and then the rest of the team trains without them. They maybe go and do some gym work, they maybe do some movement work. So that's a real consideration for managers and for coaches, is how do you coach a team together while also managing the load of all those individual players?
It's a lot, man. It's a lot to manage. It's a lot to figure out. And for some of that, you have basically better logistical departments and people who have employed better, more sophisticated algorithms for travel and accommodation and for figuring out schedules so that you're getting the team to where they're going in the best possible way that allows for the least invasive interruption to sleep schedules and the like. But then you're also trying to make sure that your teams, your players are getting back from international duty in the ideal way, that your players are getting to and from training in the ideal way. And so there's all these different ways that you can go about managing time, one might say overscheduling, to make sure that players are kind of able to handle things as best as they possibly are. It feels sort of like trying to keep up a machine that is functioning at maximum capacity as much as it possibly can. That kind of feels like what doctors and physios and the analytics departments are up against.
Yeah, I guess I was surprised at how much tracking goes on during training, right? So we all know during match, because obviously data collection companies, we're familiar with those. We all know that basically every movement that a player makes on a pitch on match day is being tracked in some way. But during training, the clubs are tracking them just as closely. We've all seen those little GPS trackers that players will wear in like a vest sort of thing.
But let's be real. It always looks like they're wearing a sports bra. It always looks like they're wearing a sports bra. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We all know the sports bras. And I was surprised at how much technology is within that little unit. So it's a GPS tracker. It's a heart rate tracker as well. It can track things like, as I said earlier, what load you're putting weight on what foot, and how the sort of mechanics of your body as well. I watched one video from a company called Zone 7, which is one of these AI companies that is partnering with a lot of Premier League clubs. And look, I didn't fully understand it, but they showed a computer screen, and it sort of showed the movement of the player's body as they were running on the training pitch, and as it was running, certain parts of the body would go red, certain parts would go orange, and it was designed to show which parts of the body are taking strain. So obviously, if you are Gio Reyna, whose hamstrings are, Joe Lowry's at this point, and you've got a big red section at his hamstrings, that might be a concern for that particular player. So I found all that stuff amazing.
I do too. Graham, how much of this are you into? How much of it are you thinking about pursuing yourself? I feel like you're more inclined to embrace new things, even if you fancy yourself the stuck in his ways Scotsman. I feel like you're the one who I expect to be waking up from your cryo sleep someday.
Oh, that's got to be Ryan Bailey, surely. I don't have a Strava account. I'm pretty sure Ryan Bailey, for a time, was posting his Strava runs on his Instagram page, which I give him grief for.
All right.
That's not too far away from what we're talking about here.
But so none of this? How much do you track your sleep schedule? Because I will say up front.
Not at all.
Okay, cool. I have probably the least healthy sleep schedule outside of maybe you. So, okay, cool. I feel better now, at least in that regard.
There are times when I've thought I should do it, and then
Yeah.
and then I snap out of that pretty quickly. I don't know, if I was a player, I mean, it's just modern soccer. All these players will be used to it by now. I read something about how a lot of youth players will be inducted into these methods from the age of 15. This is how it is for them as well. So if you're a professional soccer player, this is just the world that you live in. This is your day-to-day routine. But at the same time, I think there would be a part of me that certainly during training, which would be like, just let me play soccer. Just let me live my life. So it certainly puts into perspective the work that these players are actually putting into their craft.
It absolutely does. And I think a point you made there, especially so, the age at which they are being introduced to these methods, to this kind of approach to keeping yourself healthy, but also kind of handling the amount of games you're about to play. Because I think youth integration and bringing through academy players is a way that teams are dealing with fixture congestion as well. The more players you're bringing through, the more players that you have on hand that can kind of handle in a League Cup match or a game that maybe you aren't prioritizing, allows you just to rest some more players to kind of keep everybody's performance levels where they need to be. But it is fascinating that they're then employing these technologies and these techniques at an even younger age to an even younger player just to kind of get them up to speed as quickly as they can.
Yeah, I mean, technology is clearly playing an important role. There's only so much that clubs can do, right, to protect players from injury. And if you think this season, I'm just trying to find some of the studies that I found about the actual number of injuries. Yeah, players are suffering more injuries this season. By game week 23, this is from a study, by game week 23 of the Premier League last season, there had been 434 injuries. This season, that number was up to 455. If you look back over the last 5 seasons as well, it's an even starker contrast. By game week 23 of the 21-22 season, there were 394. So that's a big... We've gone from 300s into 400s there in the Premier League. And just anecdotally, you can go through the big clubs this season. Arsenal have had an injury crisis. Chelsea have lost their starting centre-forwards for the season. Manchester United have had an injury crisis. Spurs have had an unprecedented injury crisis for much of their season. Real Madrid have had an injury crisis where they're playing central midfielders in the back line. So there's a pattern here, and as much as these clubs are spending a lot of money on technology, it is nothing in the grand scheme of things to combat the real issue, which is just the amount of matches that these teams are playing and how they're having to play within those matches with the style of play and the intensity.
It is wild that when you think about players from bygone eras, basically, that. Oh, he tore his ACL, and so he was out for 2 years, and that whole team was in free fall as a result because you had such a long recovery time. But when a player missed time due to injury, it was much more of a headline than I think it is today. Whereas you just made me realize how often title races come down to, oh yeah, they lost 3 key players, but they lost 4,
yeah,
and that
totally.
was even harder. I don't think that was as much the case in times gone by. I think it definitely is these days where you have so many games, so many leagues marred by injury.
Yeah, I was watching Nottingham Forest the other night, and Ola went off injured in the first half, and it really struck me, wow, Forest really haven't had many injuries this season. That's a big factor in why they are in the top 4 this year, as their key players have been fit for pretty much the full season. I do think we are reaching a point with the FIFA Pro case against FIFA, and with the Club World Cup coming online this summer, and you've got the expanded World Cup next year. I do think we're going to see a rollback on some stuff. I think we're going to see some competitions. It would not surprise me if, for example, the League Cup in England disappeared. They've done similar in France. Spain only has 1 cup. The Bundesliga, I think, or Germany has only 1 cup as well. And they've got rid of replays on FA Cups as well, which was a bit of a concession. Just this week in Scotland, league reconstruction is back on the agenda because a number of clubs have gone to the league and said there's too many games. Our squads are being pushed to the limit here. There's a financial element to that discussion as well, but if players and teams are unhappy across the board, then I think the leagues will eventually listen, and it feels like that voice is getting louder and louder.
I never really thought about how silly it is that the League Cup continues to exist in the modern era when you remember that competition only exists because clubs started installing floodlights, and they were like, well, we've got lighted pitches now. We got midweek games we could be playing. Let's just start a competition to fill that time. It was literally invented to congest the schedule. So I guess if you need to decongest it, that might be a good place to start, England.
Also, politically, it exists in the modern age because of like a concession from the Premier League breakaway, right? Where it was like, well, we'll have a cup controlled by the wider league structure in the lower leagues, which happened like, 33 years ago, 32 years ago at this point. So I feel like the League Cup might have had its day. I do fear, or not fear actually, because I'd be in favour, but I do sense that it's on the chopping block.
At the same time, though, and I'll editorialize for a moment, I do still feel like any ground you give up is sort of like just another day that Gianni Infantino is going to try to schedule a game. So I still think it's just going to be a push and pull constantly. There are going to have to be lots of lawyers to exploit loopholes and then close those loopholes so that teams can't crowd in games and national teams can't crowd in another fixture and the like. You're going to have that kind of push and pull. But I agree with you overall. I think we are reaching a breaking point where something has to change.
Yeah, to that point, Taylor, about it'll just be filled one way or another, I think that the Premier League season maybe ends a little bit sooner, like a week sooner this season, because you've got the Club World Cup, and obviously in World Cup years that's what happens. So what have clubs done? What have Premier League clubs done? They have scheduled post-season friendlies. I think Manchester United are going to somewhere in Asia. We saw Liverpool do it in Australia, I think. You remember last season, Barcelona finished their last game of the season. They were on the plane. They went straight from the stadium onto the plane to go and play somewhere else in the world. So these clubs, on one side, they complain about it, and then on the other side, they pack their own schedule with these money-spinning friendlies.
And that's where, like, to go back to the point about the players, like, that's where I have so much sympathy for them. I have a lot of sympathy for them when it comes to this issue. But, like, yes, they have their own private chefs and a person saying you have to be asleep at this point, and you have to wake up at this point, and you have to be here, and you have your own private trainer and all this stuff. At the same time, you have an organization that will say, never mind, that week you're going to this place to play this game, and you have to do it, otherwise you're in breach of contract. It really is just not looking out for the player at the expense of people needing to make money. So I think it's a very frustrating reality.
I envisage like them pulling the players into the club office, the CEO office, and all the load management programs are on the table in front of them. We're going to play a game in Dallas a week or 3 days after the end of the season, and they go, "What about our load management?" It just spreads everything across the room. Just ignore that.
Yeah, just ignore it.
Off the end of the table.
It's like every Star Trek episode where, like, Scotty can't find more power and then suddenly finds more power out of nowhere. That feels like what they're asking these players to do. It's like, yeah, sure, you're redlining across the board, but we got to make money for our Malaysian noodle suppliers, so we're going to Malaysia. You guys better be ready to play.
Yeah, that is the modern soccer conundrum in a nutshell there. Love it.
Yay. And on that optimistic note, I hope you've enjoyed this episode about fixture congestion and complaining about owners. I always find a way to make it about complaining about owners or Infantino. Graham Ruthven, thank you for talking it all out with me today.
Thank you, Taylor Rockwell. I might start wearing one of those sports bras with the trackers in it while I'm watching games, in the hope that the AI will come up with some form of podcasting load management program for me.
Have you ever tracked your heartbeat during a game?
Yes. Oh, where was it that? Where was it recently that I had that? I know what it was. It was the opening game of the Euros, and my watch continually was giving me the warning of your heart rate is too high. I had to turn my watch off because every couple minutes it was giving me that warning.
That is slightly more fun than when my baby / toddler was screaming, and it would give you the helpful alarm of like, you are in too loud of an environment. It's like, yes, watch. I'm aware. That's not where I would like to be. So thank you to our watches for trying to keep us healthy, and the physios who do the same for the players we love. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.